Welcome to Straight Talk for Real Life, episode number 1, brought to you by Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. Today, we're talking about what the World Health Organization says is one of the most common psychological complaints in the world, anxiety. It's also the subject of a documentary called Angst, produced by Seattle-based IndieFlix. Listen in. The insights might surprise you. Welcome to Straight Talk for Real Life. I'm Bob Peacock. If you are living and breathing and listening to this podcast, chances are pretty good that you've experienced some form of anxiety in your life, whether or not you recognized it at the time. Well, today we are going to be talking with two women who are passionate about education and awareness on this very topic. Today, our guests on the phone are Scilla Andreen and Dr. Tam Nguyen. Scilla is executive producer of the film Angst, which is a terrific documentary that takes a close look at how young adults feel when they are dealing with anxiety, what causes it, its effects, and what we can do about it. Also, Dr. Tam Nguyen is a clinical psychologist and behavioral health director of Palo Alto Medical Foundation Sutter Health. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Scilla, I want to start with you. We see and hear a lot about anxiety these days, perhaps because we're living in a world that can feel increasingly competitive, ultra busy, and sometimes a bit overwhelming. Anxiety is a byproduct of all that, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's what I learned making the film, is that I think everyone feels that social media, our use of technology, this plugged in, on-demand, breaking news world that we live in is affecting our sleep. It's affecting how much we get up physically and move, how much time we spend outside in the daylight, how little we are connecting with each other and just with ourselves.
So is that what inspired you to make this documentary?
No. What inspired me to make this movie was, I actually didn't want to make this movie. I had no desire to make this movie. We have a blended family. We have 6 kids. I'm a mom and a filmmaker, and a friend of mine had asked me to make a movie about mental health because I make movies that I take out into schools and corporations for people to come together as a community and watch and have discussions. And she kept saying, you've got to make a movie about mental health. And I just thought, I didn't know anything about it. I felt it was heavy, a little bit depressing, and I didn't think anyone would actually want to see a movie about mental health. And a year later, and I worked with her, so I saw her often, and I got a call one morning that she had died by suicide. And I realized that, I really didn't know what was going on, and I knew her well, and I thought I should have known that. And so I decided that I became more aware, and I started hearing about, kids in our city in Seattle that had died by suicide. I was hearing about all of these people who are really hurting, and I've been kind of afraid to have that conversation. So I decided right then and there to make a movie about mental health. It had to be filled with resources and tools and hope, and it needed to, educate us and create some sort of a path forward. And that's what Angst is. And now we've been screening in almost 50 countries and coming up on 2,000 screenings. So I guess people do want to have this conversation.
Well, that was one thing that really struck me, was how positive the movie was. It deals, like you say, with a really serious subject, but you handled the subject in such a friendly and hopeful way.
Well, I will just say that it's not scary to talk about. We think it is. We have anxiety about talking about it. But once you start opening up and having those conversations, it feels really good.
Yeah. Well, the National Institute of Mental Health says that anxiety disorders affect more than 18% of adults in the U.S. But we know that that number is much higher in all reality because there's a huge number of people who don't seek help or don't even know maybe that they're having issues. When we're sick and we're not feeling good, we go to see a doctor. Why don't we do that when we're having anxiety or other mental health issues?
Well, I think there's a great deal of shame attached to it. I think that we feel like we're weak. There's just this stigma, right? And there's the shame associated with this weakness. And I'm puzzled by it, but I get it. And I mean, there are certain instances where, say, a kid gets a scholarship to college, his dream school, he's captain of the football team, and he's struggling with his mental health, he's terrified to speak up.
Right.
His whole future's on the line. And the thing is, we need to change that. Just as if you had a toothache, you go to the dentist and you get it addressed. And if you have a broken leg, you go to the doctor and you get it addressed. There will be a day when we say, oh, I've got to go and take care of my mental health, and people are not even going to think twice about it, just as if you were to say, I'm going to go take care of my physical health, right?
Absolutely.
And people are like, good for you,
right?
But we're not there yet. We need to get there by normalizing the conversation.
No, that's great. Sometimes the term anxiety is used just so loosely and lightheartedly to explain something like stress. But let's talk about what anxiety really looks like. Dr. Nguyen, what are the differences between everyday stress and anxiety and the type of anxiety that can really negatively affect your life?
Yeah, stress is really normal and needed for everyday living. Stress or anxiety, also known as fear, is what motivates us to do something, to go into action. For example, the closer we get to a deadline for a task, our stress level usually also goes up. And this increase in stress level is what motivates us to complete the task on time. This way, we won't experience the negative consequences. Mm-hmm. And in this case, stress mobilizes or calls us to action. It gets us to do something. When stress is too much or the anxiety is too much, it can actually cause us to stop moving or immobilize us. And when it's too much, when our level of stress sort of exceeds our ability to cope or respond effectively.
Right.
And then, the way that I kind of think about stress, or that can be helpful, is we often think of emotions, and as with emotions, there are what we call primary emotions, like we have primary colors, mm-hmm. and fear is considered a primary emotion. And what we think is that with primary emotions, there's also hardwired behavioral responses that go with it, a sort of particular behavior that has evolved over time so that we can survive. So for fear, or our primary response generally is to either fight, to run, or to freeze.
Right.
So usually in fear situations, we'll run or we'll just sort of freeze. And only when absolutely needed do we fight. And if you think back in the times of like when we were cavemen and we were faced in front of a bear, we weren't likely going to survive if we were to fight. And so we'll freeze or we'll sort of hide.
Got it. That's good.
And so when our usual coping strategies or mechanisms are no longer effective in helping us manage our stress, and if we're not given any additional tools, over time it can really become an anxiety disorder and really impair our functioning. That's when we really know it's no longer just normal, everyday stress.
Got it.
And generally, the treatment approach is through sort of graded exposure to whatever the fear stimulus is for us.
And what the film does a really good job, I think, of describing what anxiety looks like. These kids are so articulate, young adults that have really dealt with anxiety. How much of it applies to us as adults, Dr. Nguyen?
I think, so much of it, if not all of it, applies to us as adults. Kids perhaps express, their anxiety in different ways, and age is one of the factors that we consider in terms of when we're looking at signs of if someone is experiencing high levels of stress. And we want to step in sooner to help to provide some additional resources. And adults similarly, can also benefit from strategies that teens benefit from, including just really talking about it. As I mentioned earlier, exposure is really the gold standard treatment for anxiety. And that's because the hallmark symptom of anxiety is avoidance. And so the only way that we can really overcome that is to show up to whatever it is that is scary to us at levels that are manageable. We don't want to overstimulate ourselves to the fear stimulus, but at a level that is manageable. And that's going to look really different for everyone. But underlying that is that same sort of principle.
Right. Okay, I want to talk more about helping others who have anxiety. But before I do that, wanted to ask you, Sheila, one of the great moments in the film was when five-time Olympic champion Michael Phelps surprises this young man who idolizes the swimmer and who, it turns out, shares the same struggles with anxiety that Phelps had. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's really interesting. We've learned that anxiety doesn't discriminate. And the beautiful thing about Michael coming forward to share his story is so many people are like, what, really? I mean, look at your career, look at how well you perform. And some people say, oh, well, it's because of his anxiety that he's actually an Olympic, winner. But, this is something he has struggled with his whole life. And, he has just figured out the tools. And one of the things I love that Michael says in the movie is that we got the tools to deal with this stuff, but we need to learn how to access them. And then we need to keep sharpening them and get in the habit of using them. With the young boy in the film, he was such a fan. He knew every statistic and data point. And he too, as I said, he was 9 or 10 years old at the time that we filmed him. Michael was his idol. And one of the things that he told his mom, right before we were filming, or a couple months before filming, he shared with her how not only did he connect with him from the swimming standpoint, but he also really connected with Michael because he too, at one time or another, or lately, did not feel like being on the planet. And that, of course, like his mom just was like, oh my gosh, and she had heard about us making this movie and we all connected. And it was just such a treat to be able to bring the two of them together and to have this conversation, sort of, a 10-year-old boy and then a full-grown, Olympic athlete, having this conversation and sharing this anxiety, this mental health challenge, and working through it and inspiring each other.
It was terrific. One thing that was really interesting to me as a parent myself was when the film talked about how when we get that phone call from our child at school and she says she's having a panic attack, our tendency is to say, okay, I'll come over right now and I'll pick you up. But the film says that by doing that, we may not be helping them because we're teaching them that running away from their stress is a coping mechanism, right?
And I will tell you in the Q&A with, we screen for hundreds of families every day, and that always comes up, and the parents are like, well, then what do we do? My kid is clearly, they're having a hard time breathing, and I can't go and pick them up. It's our first reaction. It's the first thing we want to do, but it's Dr. Bubrick, actually, he's in the film as well, the senior psychologist at the Child Mind Institute, and he talks in the Q&As about, think of it like a mosquito bite. Like it's really itching, and when you scratch it, it relieves you for a minute, but it comes back worse.
Yeah.
And, it's like if you feed the seagulls, right, then more come. So the more you do that, it's truly, you are making it worse. When what we should be doing is coming up with a plan to get through stuff and not just going in and rescuing and pulling them out of the situation.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about what we can do to help someone, either our kids or our coworkers or ourselves, someone who is going through anxiety. What is the best thing that we can do?
That's a great question, Bob. I think it's really helpful to give some sort of useful tips for folks, and I'll start with what you can do to help with a loved one. I think oftentimes it's easier for us as sort of social beings to think about how we can contribute or help others. So start there and then move on to talk about how you can help yourself if you're managing or dealing with your own anxiety. With a loved one, I think the first things that I often share with folks that I'm working with, and even with my own loved ones that struggle with anxiety, is just letting them know that you're there, you want to listen, and that you understand if it's not the right time to talk. Also, what I find really helpful is asking them for permission to ask. I think, anxiety falls under the umbrella of mental health. There's a lot of stigma that comes around with it. Often, depending on the culture, the gender, folks, there's this idea that there's something wrong with me, and that I should be able to sort of deal with this on my own. And so as a loved one, a friend, a family member, a parent, just asking for permission to ask can be really helpful.
I have found that the greatest role or thing that I can do is to be there for them, like to be a great listener for my kids, which is very hard for me because I'm a rescue and fix girl. Mm-hmm. And it has taken a lot of practice for me to just listen and but really hear them and formulate a plan together and to not be afraid to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to this, but you know what, together we're going to find the answer. I can give them a hug, I can listen, I can be there for them. Mm-hmm. And I can also say, call your primary care physician if that's a great starting point. Not everyone can just jump into therapy. And, there's a process, or reach out to a school counselor, or reach out to someone at your church, or Just reach out to your wellness, people or, HR people at work. Like, there's so many places to turn. And
Right.
I think we forget that.
Right. And like at HPE, the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, that has people that are trained to help people who are going through these kind of feelings.
So two of the things that I sort of offer initially is, one, let them know you're there, listening, non-judgmental. Two is, let's do something together. Watch a movie, have coffee, go for, a walk in the park, ride the bike, or whatever particular activity, play a board game at home. And doing things that are fun. Doing things that are fun actually really helps us build our resiliency and allows folks to be able to respond to difficult situations as they come up. And it's a really simple thing, and you're having fun. So who doesn't want to have fun? Those two things can be really helpful initially and can open the door for other conversations if you learn that perhaps it is sort of worse than we had initially thought. But then you can also offer to go with your loved one to a doctor's appointment or to see a therapist to learn more about what options might be available to help them manage.
Very helpful.
Yeah, then in terms of sort of if the individual is struggling with anxiety, I think some of those things are true as well as in terms of talking about what's helpful if you're helping someone else. One thing that I will offer is sort of learning more about anxiety if you're the ones that are struggling with it. My guess would be at that point, you're sort of not quite ready to reach out for additional support or help. So learning more about anxiety, common sort of symptoms or reactions, what can be helpful, can be really useful. The only sort of caveat I'll add to that is use sort of trusted sources, right? So there's so much information out there now on the internet. You can Google almost anything. I do caution that we want to use really trusted sources when you're sort of learning more about anxiety. The other piece, again, is talking to others for support. Anxiety, as I mentioned before, the hallmark symptom is avoidance. So the thing we tend to do is actually isolate and withdraw. And so we want to do the opposite of that in order to really counteract the sort of symptoms of anxiety. So we want to reach out to others, ask for support in whatever ways that the individual feels comfortable doing that. And sometimes as a precursor to asking for support, it can be helpful to write down your thoughts, your feelings, other physical sensations that you're experiencing as a way to sort of help you gain a different experience with your thoughts and your emotional experiences. And it just gives a different perspective and allows perhaps some process of self-regulation to happen all on your own. Another sort of final tip would be to practice sort of relaxation exercises. There's a lot of sort of brain and neuroscience behind using mindfulness and relaxation as a way for an individual to get grounded. They can do, whether that's sort of exercising, doing yoga, stretching, or using visualization exercises. So I live in the Bay Area, and as you all know, we're in the midst of the postseason of the NBA sort of Western Conference. I'm a big Warriors fan. And some of you may know Klay Thompson. He's one of the guards in the team, and in the last series against the Rockets, which was sort of one of the most competitive series, they had asked him, what did you do to prepare for this? And he said, I used visualization. I didn't really sort of think about winning. I sort of talked about visualizing performing at my optimal, at my best. And that really helped me prepare for all of the different things that might show up in any given game. And I think that I sort of really appreciated him talking about that. And I think that can be really helpful with anxiety as well.
I love that. What are some other practical tips for coping with those symptoms?
So maybe I should start with some of the common symptoms of anxiety.
Yes, please.
And I think what shows up, for most people are the physiological symptoms, right? Like when you experience your heart racing, people often describe having a hard time breathing. They start to sweat. They, sort of blood pressure changes. And so those are some of those physiological reactions, I think, is often what is most scary for people who are experiencing anxiety. So specific techniques that can be used for those symptoms, I would say include things like grounding techniques. And what I mean by that is really bringing yourself back to the present moment of what is happening, where you are now in the present moment. And things, sort of really specific things we can do could be, sort of like grabbing the armchair of the chair you're sitting on, or if you're standing next to someone, just pat them on the shoulder. But just then sort of shifting your attention from your physiological responses to your environment can be quite helpful, and it helps bring you back to sort of where you are. And one of the other strategies that can be quite helpful is using your senses. So I described, touching things, but you can use any of your senses: sight, sound, smell, taste. So sort of noticing, what's the smell around me? What are the things that I'm hearing? And again, those sort of bring you back to where you are and what's happening in the present moment. And then really working on deep breathing or slowing down your breath and inhaling through your nose, and then exhaling through your mouth a couple of times, 5 to 10 times can be really helpful. All of those things, really, the goal is to take your attention and focus away from these physiological responses and to another focal point. And that just gives, again, that space so that you can sort of recognize and assess if this is really a dangerous situation or more that this is a natural reaction that's happening because you've been triggered by some fear stimulus. Another common symptom of anxiety is having a lot of distressing thoughts. We often describe a cascade of negative thoughts that will happen, where you might think, have one negative thought that leads to another one, and it goes down to sort of a domino effect pretty quickly. So for distressing thoughts or thinking, you can remind yourself, one, that these are just thoughts. They come and go, and thoughts actually can't hurt you. And then actually writing them down or speaking them out loud can be really helpful, again, sort of creating that space. And sometimes preparing inspirational quotes or song lyrics or listening to relaxing music can also be helpful in managing distressing thoughts. One thing that I've often offered to folks that I work with is having pictures or images of people they love or places that they've gone to that help them feel comfortable, relaxed, and sort of having really easy access to that. And so nowadays, whether it's youth or adults or older adults with cell phones and sort of the wide use of that, that's a really great place to sort of load those on and have them immediately accessible. If you're having another sort of common symptom is problem sleeping, whether that's sort of falling asleep or waking up in the middle of the night. So specifically, if a person is finding that they wake up suddenly and they're noticing the sort of physiological responses, is to actually get out of bed and to do something different, sort of regroup, and not do anything that's sort of totally activating. Often what I'll recommend is read like the back of your laundry detergent box to sort of help shift your attention to something else. And then it actually will calm you down, takes you back to sort of your equilibrium state, reminds you of where you are in the present moment again. So anxiety often, I describe anxiety as a disorder of sort of being in the past or being worried about what's going to happen in the future. So often many of the strategies is to sort of orienting the person back to what's happening in the here and now.
Very interesting.
Another really helpful way to cope is this strategy that I sort of call, or we often call, opposite action, is to engage in activities that will elicit opposite emotional experiences. So for fear, the opposite, something that we can do to sort of manage, engage in an activity that would be the opposite, eliciting the opposite emotion of fear. And that can really vary across individuals. So for example, when someone is feeling that way, often I'll recommend could you watch a comedy show or something that will create sort of laughter or help you feel positive mood. For me, something that I do when I'm feeling really distressed or just having a hard day is I'm a big Seinfeld fan, so I'll pop in my sort of latest Seinfeld DVD, and that sort of helps me really experience the opposite emotion and can then give me again what we talked about before, sort of the space to then manage the situation slightly differently.
Sheila, the film talks about some tips and exercises that people can do when they kind of feel a panic attack coming on. Do you remember some of those? Can you talk about some of those?
Oh, yeah. I actually get to feel like I help people all the time with those tools. And honestly, they've worked every single time. And my confidence level is high. I will say it was one of the things I wanted to get out of this film was, when someone's choking, we may not be good at it, but we know how to jump in and sort of Heimlich somebody. Or if they pass out and they're not breathing, we kind of know how to do a little CPR. I was thinking, what do we do when someone's having a panic attack or super high anxiety? How do we help them? And, Dr. Cora Bruner, who's in the film from Seattle Children's Hospital, she'll say things like, well, you can grab ice cubes, because when the ice hits the palm of your hand, it sends a message to the brain. And it's like beyond the fact that, oh my God, these are cold, which helps to distract you. It actually has a different effect on the brain. I personally snap my fingers, boom, 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 before I have to do a big presentation in front of however many people. I get to the point where I can't even remember my name or the first line or whatever, and so I snap sort of rhythmically, and that helps me calm. They're, talking. So this is what I learned from the experts filming this. Talking is such a powerful way to help bring your biorhythms down. It uses 3 executive functions of the brain. You have to make a motion, so you're moving your lips. You have to make a sound, and you have to form a sentence. And when you move the energy to the prefrontal cortex, the CEO part of the brain, that's where anxiety can't exist. And so it's a very powerful way to help bring yourself down. Talking to someone else helps. Breathing is really good. Listening to a song, super helpful, and it doesn't have to be super wooey song. It can be just a song that you love that fills you with joy or brings you calm or just makes you go somewhere else. Journaling, also very powerful. So there's a lot of great tools out there that are free, that are effective, that can work. And it's good to sort of learn which tools work best for you.
That's really good. I think that's really helpful. Sheila, I know that an even more recent film, you mentioned it, you produced, is about the serious effects of social media, a film called Like. What role does social media play in creating this sense of competition that's causing all this anxiety today?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that we interviewed Leah Pearlman, who's the co-creator of the Facebook Like button, who's also an artist. And she didn't even realize when they were making it that that a number would have such an effect on a person's self-esteem. And that people, it was lighting up the rewards sort of part of the brain when you would see a like or a share or a comment. And so people just started chasing likes. And suddenly we're comparing ourselves, right? And these perfect pictures of people that is not their reality whatsoever. Suddenly all we're revealing to people is these manufactured highlights of our life. We're not even enjoying, reality. And so, and it's just been getting so bad that we spend most of our life trying to work on that first impression over and over and over. And we're becoming disconnected with ourselves. And when you are not grounded, when you are not connected with yourself, you become this sort of shell of a person, and it's an empty feeling, and it just gets compounded. So what we talk about in the movie is there's FOMO, which is fear of missing out, which sort of it hits us on many levels. But there's also JOMO, which is the joy of missing out. It's the flip side. And you know what? It feels really good when you are not inundated with this steady stream of numbers and tracking and measurement. When you step back, and what's really important is how you feel about yourself and nurturing that joy of being present.
Well, in closing, I want to ask you both this same question. Sheila, I know that as a producer, you learn so much. You become an expert as you work on a project like this. What do you want people to know about anxiety?
I love that question. First of all, that anxiety is 100% treatable. It is not 100% curable, but it is 100% treatable. So why would you even want to spend a minute suffering in silence when you can reach out and you can start doing things, whether it's ice cubes or therapy, or in some cases, for some people, it's medication with therapy. There are so many great resources and tools out there. You can actually you can turn that into a positive in your life, and it can be one of your greater assets.
That's terrific. Dr. Nguyen, same question. What do you want people to know about anxiety?
I would absolutely agree with what's already been shared, which is it's absolutely manageable, it's treatable, and people have sort of high quality of life, function really well, do amazing things with anxiety, and are able to live with it and deal with it on a regular basis. So nothing that we can't overcome, that they can't overcome, using some of these tools that we've already talked about that can be really, really helpful, and identifying, sort of individualizing those tools for themselves.
Great. Thank you both so much for being on our first podcast.
Well, thank you.
If you haven't yet seen the movie Angst, I strongly encourage you to check it out. HPE offers a full lineup of support services to help you and your family members manage real-life challenges. If you're located outside the U.S., you can find them on the HPE Global Wellness page by searching Global Wellness on HPE Insider. If you're in the U.S., find them at wellness.hpe.com. The film's website, angstmovie.com, includes links to helpful websites, apps, and videos about anxiety, as well as FAQs, tips for managing it, and even tips for talking about it with your kids. That's all for this edition. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe to catch upcoming episodes. Let's talk again soon.